My name is Randy Vicknair. I am the Chief Lending Officer at First Guaranty Bank, and it was our privilege to sponsor the Southeastern Executive Business Forum for the second year in a row. We, at First Guaranty Bank, a primary mission of ours is to support our local communities, and there's no better way to do that than this Business Executive Forum. And so we are extremely excited to sponsor it for the second year in a row. A secondary mission of ours is to have some fun. There we go, we're getting a little bit quieter now, that's good. Second mission of ours is to have fun in what we do every day. And so as part of that, I thought I'd share a couple little interesting facts and then move on to the business at hand. I found this pretty interesting that how many of you know that the average attention span, which we're testing right now, is 3 to 8 seconds? Okay, right, pretty interesting, right? I speak slowly, so I don't know that I get much out in 3 to 8 seconds. Another interesting fact is that what I'm saying right now, 50% of the room is not hearing because they just looked down at their phone to Google what I just told you. The final fact is that breeze you just felt is everybody's heads lifting back up to look up when I mentioned the second fact there. And of course, the final fact is now you understand why I'm a banker. So they give you this overview, this paper to review and introduce the speaker. And all I can say is as I read this, I was humbled and honored to present our next speaker. During his 30-year career, Colonel Thomas Gordon commanded at every level in the operating forces. As a captain, he led a recruit training company at Paris Island and commanded both Bravo and Alpha Company, 2nd Tank Battalion. As a lieutenant colonel, he served as the commanding officer, 1st Tank Battalion, and as the first commander of the Black Sea Rotational Force, a special purpose Marine Air-Ground Task Force operating in the Caucasus, Balkans, and Black Sea region. As a colonel, he led a 4,000-member group organized in 5 battalions, executing combat operations and worldwide communications, intelligence, electronic, and cyber warfare capabilities, force protection, and supporting arms integration for all Marine expeditionary forces out of the East Coast. All of Colonel Gordon's staff assignments were in operations. He served as the Assistant Operations Officer, 2nd Tank Battalion, and as the Ground Watch Officer for Operation Iraqi Freedom. As the Plans Branch Chief for UCENTCOM, he coordinated force rotations and coalition support in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Horn of Africa. As the Assistant Chief of Staff for Operations, G3, for the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Brigade in Japan, he conducted disaster relief operations in Bangladesh, and as the Director of Operations, G3 for Marine Forces, Central Command, he integrated all U.S. Marine activities in 20 Middle Eastern countries. Colonel Gordon is a graduate of the U.S. Army's Armor Officers Advanced Course and the Joint Forces Staff College. He holds an MA from Webster University and completed his senior level education as the Commandant's Fellow at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Colonel Gordon's last assignment on active duty was the Director of the Marine Corps Command and Staff College in Quantico, Virginia. Examples of other positions include Military Secretary, Chief of Staff to the 37th Commandant of the Marine Corps and serving as Resident Fellow with the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City. Colonel Gordon was inducted into the Council on Foreign Relations as a life member and Omicron Delta Kappa, the National Leadership Honor Society in 2021. He is the author of a best-selling book, Marine Maxims, Turning Principles into Practice. Following his retirement from the Marine Corps, he embarked on a new role as Commandant of Cadets at the Citadel. Please join me in welcoming Colonel Thomas Gordon.
Hey, good morning. How are we doing? Great morning. Hey, I know I'm between you and lunch right now, and I know you've had a lot of remarkable speakers, and I'm humbled by the attendance here today. It's a remarkable group, and I'm excited to be back here in Louisiana. Hey, let me ask you, I understand most of the businesses and corporations represented here are regional in the southeastern portion of Louisiana, but anyone fly here today? Anyone? Anyone fly recently? A lot of crazy stuff going on in aviation, right? Anyone get the exit row? You, sir? What were your qualifications?
I read the brochure.
You read the brochure, all right, that was more than most, right? That was more than most. Hey, is it just me, or do you all ever size up the person on the exit row? Maybe it's a little twinge of jealousy, that extra leg room. But not to make you afraid to fly, but what if we actually needed that person on the exit row? What if there was an in-flight emergency and we had to rapidly exit the aircraft? Think about it for a second. That drunk 3 rows back is going to be the first one off the aircraft, and he's going to let you know it, right? Or how about that new mother, 3 rows up with the infant in her arms? She doesn't care about getting off the aircraft, but she's going to make darn sure that that baby gets off. Or what about that elderly couple? They've already embraced and realized they're probably not going to get off the aircraft. Okay, January 15, 2009. United Airlines Flight 1549 takes off out of LaGuardia. Massive bird strike takes out both engines. Remarkably, miraculously, the pilot is able to land the plane on the Hudson. We all know the story, right? Now, I'm not here to take anything away from Captain Sully. When Hollywood makes a movie about you and they pick Tom Hanks to play the character, chances are you probably did something right. But if you were to talk to the people on Flight 1549, they would tell you about another gentleman. They would tell you about Mark Hood, Citadel class of 1983, former Marine captain. By God's providence, he was on the exit row that day. And they would talk about his principled leadership, his calm but firm, reassuring presence on the aircraft that day that allowed everyone to exit safely without panicking. Now, he wasn't the last person off the aircraft. Captain Sully never would have given him that honor. But he did walk side by side down the aisle to make sure everyone was off before those two departed. All right, now I said I wasn't going to make you afraid to fly. Just don't do it, I guess, on the second week in January. We're going to go back a little further. January 13th, 1982, Florida Airlines no longer exists. Florida Airlines Flight 90 takes off out of National Airport, now we know as Reagan National Airport in DC. There was a terrible snowstorm that day and the ground crew failed to properly de-ice the aircraft. When the aircraft tried to gain elevation, it failed and it clipped the 14th Street Bridge, ruptured in half and plunged to the ice in the Potomac. I remember watching this vividly as a kid with my mother as she cried. The Park Service was the first on scene with a helicopter, and they dropped a life preserver down on a rope. And the gentleman at the breach, we'll call it the exit row, took that life preserver, turned around and passed it to the woman behind him, tied it around her, and allowed the helicopter to drag her to the banks of the river. This repeated 5 more times, till on the 6th and final time, when the helicopter came over the fuselage, the gentleman at the breach, at the exit row, was gone, and the aircraft had sunk through the ice. President Reagan talked about the heroism, the principled leadership of that gentleman 2 weeks later at the State of the Union address. They didn't know who he was then, but we know who he is now. His name was Elred Dean Williams, Citadel class of 1957. He was an investment banker at the Federal Reserve and had just gotten engaged. According to his fiancée, he was deathly afraid of the water. See, at the Citadel, we've produced astronauts, bankers, congressmen, congresswomen, doctors and dentists, engineers, and our fair share of 4-star generals. But I think what we do best for society is we create that principal leader, that man or woman that you want on the exit row. Now, at the Citadel, my job is to educate and develop principal leaders and return young men and women of virtue and character back to society where they can be successful in all walks of life. It's an incredible opportunity, and I couldn't imagine doing anything more significant in this second chapter of my life. Now, I did publish a book, and I have to thank Dean Lopez. She read my book, and she heard me speak, and she invited me to come about 6 months ago to this forum. As I said, I'm honored to be back. The book's actually doing pretty well. I'm humbled to report it's on its 5th reprint, and it's also finding a wider audience. I wrote it for Marines. It was just kind of my pass down. It was my way of paying it forward before I retired. But but the book has actually found a venue, a lot of readership in the business community and the law enforcement community. And it's just my gift to you. Hopefully, when I wrote the book, someone asked me last night, how long did it take you to write the book? And I said it was over 30 years. I actually started writing the book when I was a young cadet at the Citadel myself, and I was issued this small notebook that became my leadership journal. And it worked like this. Whenever I worked in close proximity of a leader I truly respected, I took some time and I journaled whatever it was that individual did that resonated with me. And I said, if I'm ever in command, I'm going to do that. Now, as I said, I did it for over 30 years, so it wasn't all unicorns, rainbows, and parades. I worked for more than my fair share of, how do I say this politely, martinets, right? So whenever I was working for an asshole, excuse me, we can bleep that out, right? When I was ever working for one of those individuals, I took that same book and I flipped it over to the back and I wrote, I swear, if I'm ever in command, I'll never do that. Well, after about 15 years, the front of the book met the back of the book, and I guess I led a charmed Marine Corps career up until that point, because I had far more entries in the front than I did in the back. But if I was to be honest, I learned so much more from the entries in the back than the front. But I had this stream of consciousness, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I had just taken over 1st Tank Battalion as battalion commander. And I organized it, and as I went through it and organized it, it turned out to be really 50 maxims. They were tactical and practical, kind of irreducible minimums to be successful in leadership. And I turned it into an outline, and I gave it to my lieutenants. And it got passed around the Marine Corps a few times. And before I retired, I was encouraged to publish it, and I did. So if the lessons in there aren't helpful to you, I assure you the bibliography and the works cited will be. So again, I think you all have a copy, and if you have any questions about it, what I'd like to do here this morning is just talk about the first 4 maxims in my book, the 5th if we have a little bit of time, right? The first 4 maxims in my book kind of lay more of a philosophical foundation, if you will, a parapet that you can defend your leadership from, but the rest of them are all very tactical and practical about how to improve performance in your organization, how to build cohesion in your organization, or how to lead through crisis and failure. By definition of leadership, we all should have one, right? But this is mine. As you can see, I focus on inspiration versus motivation, and I focus on will. Why will? Well, in my line of work, will has decided every battle since antiquity. It's not the biggest force, or the best trained force, or the best equipped force, but it's the force with the most will. See, in every fight, at some point, someone realizes they have lost, and when they have, they're right. So I wanted to build that collective grit with them. But principled leadership, which is what we're going to talk about here today, has a lot more to do with how you did it than what you did. It's about being able to influence others to accomplish the mission while adhering to the organization's core values. Now, the first maxim in my book, well, it's neither new nor novel. The quote there is actually lifted off the Temple of Delphi, 500 years BC. Now, knowing thyself is not easy, but self-aware leaders, those who are capable of being honest about themselves, with themselves, about themselves, are perceived as authentic. And people will always follow, will always resonate with an authentic leader. Now, yesterday I had the privilege of speaking to the students over at Southeastern University, and we talked about character development and building resiliency and resolve. And I too started with maxim number 1, because I was focusing with them on knowing their why. See, at 18, 19, and 20, they get horrible advice, right? They're told to be themselves. Can you imagine any more hollow rhetoric to tell a 19-year-old than to be yourself? I mean, really, what does that mean? They have no idea who they are. And that's not meant to be pejorative, it's just a statement of fact. So I told them yesterday, hey, desire what you admire. Who are your heroes? Why do you look up to that person? Why do you want to emulate that person and then back plan from there? But now this audience should be a little bit more comfortable in their skin. You should really kind of have a pretty good idea of who you are at this point, what your strengths and what your weaknesses are. But we've all worked for that CEO, right, that boss, with that elevated sense of importance and that absolutely abysmal self-awareness, right? So self-awareness is a continuum that doesn't stop, and it is measurable. There are some great techniques and exercises in my book I could refer you to, but if you're bold enough, if you're courageous enough today at lunch, I just ask you to kind of pull the table around there. So you know what your strength is, you know what your weakness is, and you have a pretty good idea of how well you communicate. If you're courageous, ask the person to your left or to your right, what your strength is, what your weakness is, and how well you communicate. And see if they repeat it back to you. And if they get those three or two of those three, you probably have a high degree of self-awareness. Now, self-awareness is also important because I like to say, when you know who you are, you'll know what to do. Being self-aware helps you align your moral compass. You make sure that the video matches the audio. See, in leadership, when you're running a corporation, when you're running a company, you don't need a compass for those self-evident decisions. As a matter of fact, if you're in charge, you shouldn't be making those self-evident decisions. Those should be delegated down to your subordinates. You should just be left with those hard, ugly ones that make you stare at the ceiling fan through the night to try to figure out what you're going to do. That 51% answer that you're looking for. Right? Being self-aware helps you with that. When you have a refined gut, being self-aware enables you to trust your gut. Now, as you wrestle with the first maxim, the paradox of the second is intentional. At the Citadel, in 3 short weeks, I'm going to commission the next cohort of officers to lead this nation. They're going to raise their right hand and swear to defend the Constitution. Everything in their life up until that point has been about them. How they got to the Citadel, how they got that scholarship, how they made it through officer candidate school was about their grade point average, their physical fitness score, that resume that they had produced for themselves. But as soon as they raise their right hand, it's no longer about them. It's about those young Marines, those young sailors, those young soldiers that have been entrusted to their care. I say the price of leadership at that point is, in fact, self-awareness. Now as an executive, now running the military portion of a college, I have the honor and privilege of hiring staff, identifying the next future leaders and putting them in those positions. And whenever I do, I ask them a very simple question. Why do you want the position? Shouldn't be a surprise, but that question allows me to bifurcate the stack. Because when you're interviewing people, I'm sure you've shared the same experience. How they answer that question, you can determine if that individual wants to be somebody or they want to do something. When you're 17, 18, it's perfectly normal to want to be somebody. A matter of fact, they probably wouldn't get a commission in the Marine Corps. They wouldn't get to be accepted to Southeastern University if they didn't have that desire to be somebody. But if you're talking to somebody who's been out there in the operating forces, they want to be somebody, that's probably a little bit of narcissism that you don't need in your organization. At least that's how I look at it. I look for people who want to do something. You're all captains of industry here. You have the courage and the character to run a corporation. You don't want to be somebody. You know what it takes to do to be successful. It's not about having a name on a placard, right? It's about making an impact, creating an organization that's going to be a worthy legacy that you can pass on, that you can leave a mark on. Remember, it's not about you. Now, the third maxim in my book, again, none of these are mine. These are things that I have learned from great leaders. Here, of course, I'm paraphrasing Teddy Roosevelt. Marines don't care how much you know, but they'll know how much you care. I ask, how do you convince people that you care? Anyone?
You show them.
You show them. Absolutely. How? I would say the best way to show your people that you care about them is by getting to know them. Nothing sounds so sweet to a man than the sound of his own name. Anyone know who said that? Dale Carnegie, 50 years ago. Nothing sounds so sweet to a man than the sound of his own name. See, before I would go out, we call it, in the Marine Corps, we call it battlefield circulation, right? So as the colonel, before I'm gonna go out and visit some of my units, of course, before I would go and visit a unit, I would look up, research how that unit's doing, right? Measures of performance, measures of effectiveness, their state of readiness, equipment readiness, training readiness. But for every minute I spent on the performance aspects of it, I'd spend the same amount of time researching the people that I knew I would encounter, memorizing their first names. Now, my executive assistant, she has a job whenever I'm going to go out and visit people, she creates face charts for me so that I memorize everybody's first name before I meet them. Nothing sounds so sweet to a man than the sound of his own name. I will know the spouse's name of whoever I meet. I will know if they have kids. I'll ask how their kid's doing at Southeastern University, how they're enjoying it. Right? So imagine as a colonel walking in and talking to a young first lieutenant, right? And the colonel knows his name, knows his spouse's name, and knows they just had a brand new baby, and asks about that. What's that lieutenant gonna think when I leave and I move on to the next person? Wow, the old man knows who I am. The old man, I must be doing something right? The old man knows who I am. It's not rocket science. None of this stuff is very complicated. It's just investing in people. People who feel appreciated, right, will always exceed expectations. Now, the Marine Corps turns everything into doctrine, right? Leadership's an awful lot of fun. We distill it into a mnemonic, right? JJ did, tie buckle. These are the 14 Marine Corps leadership traits. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to go through them with you. What I do, though, when I'm talking to Marines, so instead of having 800 executives here, imagine the room being filled with 800 Marines. I always throw this slide up, and I ask the Marines, hey, what leadership traits missing? There's no wrong answers. I always get, the two answers I get always is humility, yes, right? Most Marines can't spell humble, right? It is conspicuously absent from the list. Empathy is another one that's missing, but I let them, they wrestle with it a little bit. They throw out some leadership traits, and then I tell them what my answer is. I tell them the missing Marine Corps leadership trait is love. Feel the room, right? This is filled with 1,000 18 to 22-year-old Lance Corporals, right? Now everyone's uncomfortable, right? You can physically watch them squirming in their seat. Oh my gosh, what's about to happen? The old man's gonna talk to me about love, right? So we've taken the awkward meter and just jammed it into red, right? I said, no, let me unpack this a little bit. Let me unpack this. See, if your Marines believe that you love them, if your employees believe that you love them, that you truly care about them, there is absolutely nothing they will not do for the organization. Now notice, I didn't say for you, because we've already established that in maxim number 2. It's not about you. It's about taking care of your people. Now, my favorite leadership technique, if you would, is what I call the letter bomb. Now, I'm not talking about that crazy guy up there in Idaho or whatever, who was a Kaczynski, who's dropping high explosives in the mail. But I assure you, my letter bombs had an equally powerful kinetic event. See, how it would work is this. If I was ever out touring the area, if I was out looking around and I was going to drop in one of my organizations, I don't know, I'd drop into Janie King there, and I'd see Melissa, right? And Melissa, whatever Melissa was doing, right, that resonated with me, that caught my eye, I'd break out my notebook and I'd write down, Melissa Stango. And I'd get back to my office and I'd scream for the Adj. Now, the ADGE is human resources, right? It's the S1 in the organization. And I'd asked the ADGE to go and pull Melissa's RED. Now, the RED is the Record of Emergency Data. Any vets here? Okay. Thank you for your service. Why would I want Melissa's RED? You know? Melissa's RED would carry like her spouse's name, right? Or most importantly, if she was younger, it would have her parents' name and address. See, I'd take a couple of minutes that night before I went home, and I'd just scribble out a quick handwritten letter. Dear Mrs. and Mrs. Stango, I just want to take a minute and tell you how incredibly impressed I am with Melissa and all the amazing things that she is doing for this organization, right? And oh, by the way, I know Melissa would not be nearly as successful as she is, right, without your love and support. So from me to you, thank you. Respectfully, T.J. Gordon, United States Marine Corps Commanding. Now, my letter bombs all had a 96-hour fuse. Why? Well, it took 2 days for that letter to get to wherever it was going in southeastern Louisiana. It would take another day for Melissa's parents to get the letter, read it, and give her a call. Now, selfishly, I would always set a reminder on my phone to go back to, wherever I saw Melissa, on the 4th day, just to watch, right? Just for my own personal edification. Whatever Melissa was doing 4 days ago, what do you think she's doing now? I literally set her on fire, right? Whatever she was doing, she's doing 10 times better, 10 times faster, and she's pulling the whole team with her. And what did it cost me? A few minutes and a 49-cent stamp. Now, I know this is being recorded, but I think the statute of limitations has run up. If I was to be honest, I actually never even paid for the 49-cent stamp. I always consider that official mail and ran it through the meter, right? But the return on investment, I have sent out hundreds of these things, and I cannot tell you the measurable impact. I cannot quantify the impact that they have had on various organizations which I have led. Now, Melissa would tell you that she wasn't doing whatever she was doing so that I would notice. She would deny that 6 days a week and twice on Sunday. But I can prove the opposite. I can. Do you have a high-performing employee in your organization? You want to make them stop? It's easy. All you have to do is nothing. Why should I bust my ass if no one's going to notice? Something to think about. So the 4th maxim in my book is my command philosophy. Now, in the Marine Corps, we're required to publish your command philosophy. It's supposed to be kept to a page, and you're supposed to display it conspicuously around the organization. I've been doing this for over 30 years. The Marines never read it, all right? You spend a lot of time on it, you pour your soul into it, the Marines never read it. I knew the Marines never read it. So instead of publishing an editorial, I just distilled it down to do right and fear no man. Now, we could talk a whole hour on just unpacking that one statement. By right, I was communicating to my Marines that we would do what we ought to do. They know what they ought to do. We would lead with integrity. Our actions would not be defined by situational ethics or legal compliance, but would be judged by an honor system that transcended it all. Now, the fear no man aspect of it, that wasn't intended to be bellicose, but a public repudiation of what I saw as a young lieutenant, leadership by fear and intimidation, which I don't believe is actually leadership at all. I think that's coercion. But there was a warfighting imperative to what I was doing with my message. Not to get into a discussion about Marine Corps doctrine, but Marine Corps doctrine is referred to as maneuver warfare. The Army calls it mission command. Following the commander's intent. See, I wanted my young officers to have the confidence to deviate, the courage to deviate. See, in combat, that young lieutenant in contact, is best equipped. I call it the primacy of proximity. He or she is best equipped to be able to seize the initiative and carry the day when an opportunity presents itself or the plan no longer makes sense. Now, that young officer is not going to deviate from the plan that he or she has been given without the confidence to know that the old man has their back. See, in my organizations, my people knew never to fear the consequences of a well-intentioned mistake. When well-intentioned mistakes are treated as learning opportunities, right, the organization grows. When people are afraid to act, the organizations shrink and die. Now, the last one I wanted to put in here, and I'm looking at the time, but I wanted to save time for some questions. But as I mentioned, the lessons in my book are supposed to be tactical and practical. So one, maxim number 42 is bad things can and will happen to good organizations. Now, the pictures on the slide are from an incident in Afghanistan back in 2017, I believe. See, at that point in the campaign, we had a small number of Marine forces operating in country, but we were pretty much restricted to operating out of forward operating bases or small COPs. And we wanted the Afghans, Army and the National Police to be doing the fight, and we were enabling them through intelligence, surveillance, and supporting arms integration. The gentleman on the slide is Roger Turner. He was a 1-star then. He's now a 3-star. And he's a friend of mine, but he has continual upward trajectory, I'm sure. But on that day, Roger's staff was made aware of what they believed to be a group of about 35 Taliban that were organizing and were about to attack a Red Cross or a Red Crescent food distribution center. Now, at that time, they believed they had positive identification of a hostile group about to commit a hostile act. So they cleared a mission that came in and dropped ordnance on that organization, on that group of men. Now, when they rolled up afterwards to do the battle damage assessment, the bodies were all wearing Afghan National Police uniforms. A horrific tragedy, potentially, that could have derailed the entire campaign at that point. Now, Roger understood that fault is past tense, but responsibility is present tense. Let me say that again. As the commander, Roger understood fault is past tense, but responsibility is present tense. So when he came up on the net, and I was the chief of staff at the Commandant at the time, so within 10 minutes of this report coming up, it was being reported up to the Pentagon. And I was one of the first people to take the report and heard what had happened. This, of course, would be going over to the State Department. Presidents would be talking to Karzai. I mean, it was going to be a big deal. But Roger took complete and total responsibility for the incident. He knew there was going to be an investigation. Now, when they investigated it, it turned out that those individuals were in fact not Afghan National Police. They were Taliban. They were wearing the Taliban had acquired the uniforms, and they were going to use the uniforms to be able to get in close proximity to be able to attack the outpost. Now, Roger didn't know that at the time. His staff didn't know that at the time. But Roger knew that you can survive something really bad, horrific happening in your organization, but you can't survive the cover-up. You can't survive the cover-up. Now, when Roger took complete responsibility for that, before he even knew what happened, what did he tell his staff? Now, for those who haven't, served, understand that Roger Turner, as the 1-star, didn't actually give the order to actually drop the strike. There was probably a young major or a lieutenant colonel that gave that order. But Roger, by taking responsibility for that incident, he communicated to his staff, 1, I have your back. I have your back. Whatever happened, I got it. It's on me. And by doing so, He also, one, was a vote of confidence for them, but two, equally important, he removed any incentive that anyone would have to cover the incident up. Again, you can survive something bad happening in your organization. You can't survive a cover-up. Bad things are going to happen. How you react is going to decide whether or not you're going to continue to have that corner office or not, whether or not you're going to continue to be the person in charge of that organization. My time machine's broke, so is yours, right? But we can take responsibility for what that happens and communicate that out loudly and clearly to reassure all of our stakeholders, most importantly, our employees, that are going to be, that you're going to need to lead through whatever the crisis is. Now, I had a couple of things here at the end, just some additional, I told you, my book's full of tactical and practical things. As I mentioned, if you have a notebook, if you have that notepad on your phone, I always use that to populate all the names of my first report, the first names of all my first reports, their family members, so that when you're having that conversation, before you walk in, if you don't know, if you don't remember, you just look down your phone really quick. We all have it in our hand. Instead of doom scrolling, do something positive and productive with it, right? Look up about your people right there. Now, something easy, just populating their birth dates is always a great opportunity to go out and not just send them an email, but actually go and slap them on the shoulder and wish them happy birthday. Now, life happens in organizations, right? And inevitably, one of our employees are going to have a parent die, right? Or God forbid, a child die, or a spouse pass away. Whenever that happens, we're always really good at coalescing around the problem right there, right? The food chain goes out, everyone floods their house with casseroles, right? We're good. I mean, this is Louisiana, right? So, you all know what to do when that happens. I'll tell you what I do. I set a note on my phone for 364 days from then. Why? Well, because I'm going to go and I'm going to walk up to that individual in my organization and I'm going to slap them on the shoulder, and I'm like, how you doing? No, how are you doing? I'm sure you're thinking about your dad or your mom today. Know that we're thinking about you. That 10, 15-second conversation, when you communicate to your people that you truly care about them, there's nothing that they won't do for the organization. All right. I think I saved 15 minutes, as promised, for questions.
We have one over here.
Yes, ma'am.
So often people find themselves in leadership positions because they were great individual contributors. They're really good, whatever, and they become a leader. And often they struggle because they don't have either the knowledge to do the people side of leadership, or they don't have the desire to do the people side of leadership. So how do you address that issue?
How about we go back and define leadership for a second? Okay. So I had my definition of leadership up there, and if you read it, you realize that leadership's not a noun. It's a verb. It's not a position. It's not a parking spot, right? It's a relationship. In the Marine Corps, we always talk about leadership problems. I don't believe that leadership is in fact a problem, but it is about helping people solve problems. In fact, if your people aren't bringing you their problems, chances are they don't think that you're their leader, regardless of what your position says in the organization's hierarchy. So you are an exceptional engineer, doctor, technician, and now all of a sudden you're thrown into that leadership position. Well, the premise of my book is that leadership is not a process, but it's an art that needs to be refined. And the only way to do it is by getting reps and sets in, right? I also believe that even the poorest prospects, right, can learn about leadership through self-study. But we all know the best way to learn leadership, quite frankly, is through experience. What I tried to do in the book was capture 30 years of experience I had in the best practices of some of the best leaders so that they can learn more about it. Getting those reps and sets in, but the best advice I could give you if you're new in the position and you're thrown into it, we were talking about this last night. Maximum in my book, a smart man knows when he's stupid, okay? If you don't know, I assure you, your people know you don't know. Let me say that again. If you don't know, I assure you, your people know that you don't know. Now, when you fake that you know, we give this horrible advice out there, fake it till you make it. Couldn't imagine any worse advice, right? When you fake you know something that you don't know, you communicate two things to your organization. One, a lack of character, right? A lack of character. And two, that you're not coachable. So any help that you were going to get from your people, you just turn that spigot off, right? They're not going to invest in you. They're not going to make you successful, right? If you present yourself as already knowing the answer. Why waste our time, right? So, yeah, a smart man knows when he's stupid. Don't be afraid to ask questions. That's how I lead, is by asking questions. Thank you for that one.
We had another submission.
I have one in the back.
Oh.
Yes, sir.
I heard that great leaders lead from the rear, not from the front. Can you touch on that?
Great leaders lead from the rear and not from the front. Okay. We could wrestle with that one. Now, as a Marine, that kind of is counterintuitive, but there's an aspect of setting the example, right? People do what people see, as I like to say. That is true right up until a point. In the military, I think that is true right up to battalion command. At battalion command is where it all comes together. The best job I ever had, CO of 1st Tank Battalion. But when I was a group commander, when I was in charge of 2nd MHG, and I had 4,500 Marines divided up into 5 battalions, my job was actually to set the conditions for my battalion commander's success, right? It wasn't so much as the group as I was trying to set the conditions for my subordinate commander's success. Maxim number 2, it's not about me. But that, I believe, sir, is what you're talking about, is setting the conditions for your subordinate success. And if that's leading from behind, I'll buy that. Just don't tell anybody that I said that. Thank you.
We had 3 similar questions, so I'll try to tie them together. How do you engage employees who are disengaged, no longer want to do the job, or underperforming?
As a commander, we've all heard the expression, you spend 90% of your time on 10% of your troops, right? And what 10% are they talking about? Well, of course, they're talking about the bottom 10%. I'm not here to dismiss that, right? I think it's the reality of management. It's the reality of leadership. You are going to spend an inordinate amount of time on that bottom 10%. But I always try to discipline myself. For every minute I spent on an underperforming employee, I spent the same amount of time on a top employee. So for me, it's a 10-80-10 split. But to answer the question, you have to pressurize that bottom 10%. You have to be willing to pressurize that system, those individuals to the point where they either step up and get into the middle 80 or they go find somewhere else to be successful. Because tolerating those disengaged, non-productive employees that are just oxygen thieves in your organization, well, that can have a corrosive effect on the other 80 or 90%. It goes back to what we were talking about before. The corollary to why should I bust my ass if no one cares, right, no one pays attention, is, well, why should I bust my ass if they're not? If they're not. So sometimes I know finding quality employees is hard nowadays. It's a challenge. I'm dealing with it myself. But that old adage, well, somebody's better than nobody, no false or words have ever been said, right? So yes, no. Somebody is not always good. Sometimes it's better to, you gotta love your dog enough to shoot it, right? Old Yeller reference.
We've had 2 more submissions that are very similar. How have you managed reporting to a leader who has position power but is not a good leader? What do you do if you get an order that you know is unethical or immoral?
Okay, two questions, same coin, different sides of it. Leading up, incredibly challenging opportunities. As I said, I've had to work for some very difficult bosses over 30 years. Fortunately, not many of them, but the ones that I had, certainly left a mark. How do you try to lead up and make sure that you're successful? Sometimes when you have that toxic leader on the top, as I like to say, as an intermediate commander, sometimes you're the buffer, sometimes you're the magnifying glass, right? So sometimes you need to be able to buffer out that toxicity from coming down and affecting your folks. But that toxicity may not necessarily be, due to an overbearing or toxic boss. It may just be, can be a completely apathetic boss as well. Can also have that toxic effect on the organization. That's when you need to be the magnifying glass to the organization. But the biggest mistake that you can make when you're in that situation is passing it off onto your boss, right? Because loyalty, we like to say loyalty is a two-way street, but when you're in a position of authority, right, your people will know. So one of the biggest mistakes I see young lieutenants make is they will say, they'll pass word to their unit, to their platoon, or to their company, and they say, hey, we're gonna do this, and if it's an unpopular thing, they'll say that we're doing this because the colonel said. Now, I don't believe they're trying to be disloyal when they say that. I think what they're doing is they're trying to put an exclamation point on it, right? That somehow it's, if the colonel said it, it's more important than if they have said it. What they don't realize, what they do is they've completely abdicated all of their responsibility and authority. They've turned themselves into a messenger. And if I needed a messenger, all I would do is send out a group chat, right? I need subordinate commanders. Now, when a subordinate commander passes, see, here's the thing, like Marines bitch, all right? Employees gripe and complain. If they're griping and complaining about the little stuff, things are going great, right? Yeah. If it's the big stuff, well, then you probably need to spend a little bit more time focusing on what they're griping about. But when you pass an unpopular order off to your subordinates, you say, hey, we're doing this because the boss says so. Now, the employees are going to gripe, they're going to complain, but they're going to complain to you. And now you've put yourself in that untenable situation where now you have to defend the boss. What if the boss is doing something indefensible, right? So now you've put yourself in this untenable position where you have to defend the indefensible, right? Or you have to be completely disloyal. You've created this problem yourself. Had you just taken that same directive and passed it off as yours, your people know that you didn't come up with that, right? They'll know that it was your boss that passed this. But your stock will go up with them because they'll know that you're a person of character, right? That you'll own those difficult decisions. Now, is there a limit to that? Absolutely. When we start getting into unethical, immoral, or illegal things, I go back to that moral compass we talked about and knowing yourself. One exercise I would do when I was the director of the Command and Staff College is I would have my students, they were all majors, mid-grade professionals that were identified to be the future battalion and squadron commanders of the Joint Force, future commanders. I would always have them draft up what their letter of resignation looked like. We all need to know what our letter of resignation looks like. That goes back to self-awareness, right? Leading with integrity. When you have integrity, that's all that matters. When you don't have integrity, that's all that matters. So we all need to know what that red line is and where we won't go any further. Okay, time for one more?
There was a question about your chapter that was titled, "Don't Make Enemies, but if you do, don't treat them lightly." They want a quick little lesson on it.
Okay, don't make enemies, but don't treat them like, it's kind of a bookend to, there's maximum number, I also have a maximum that says don't be an ass, right? No one wants to work for an ass. And I probably should apologize to Dean Lopez. She's gonna have to beep all these things out, I think, throughout. You should have known that was gonna happen a little bit there, Dean, by inviting a Marine to come up there and speak to the audience. Not supposed to convey a threat. What I was saying in that particular chapter is you get a lot, don't make enemies if you don't have to, right? And a big part of that is keep little people little. Every organization has its malcontents, and I always try just to ignore them, especially today. Well, I was talking to the dean, we were both talking about our use of social media, right? I use social media quite a bit in my position, but I only use it to transmit. To me, it's a monologue. This is how I'm pushing my information out. What I never ever do is I never, one, read the comments, you know, and I certainly would never respond to a comment on social media. If we're gonna have a conversation, it's gonna be face to face. And that just kind of goes back, especially in this world today that we're in right now. Don't make enemies, but if you do, don't treat them lightly. You definitely don't want to have a conversation with somebody, a malcontent in your organization or a distractor to your organization. You never want to have that conversation out there on social media. It creates this audit trail that no one's going to be proud of at that point, and you never win an argument on social media. Now, I have at times when someone has brought a particularly egregious comment on social media, I have actually reached out to those people and said, hey, this particular post was brought to my attention. Where are you at? What do you mean? Where are you? Why? Well, I would like to have this conversation face to face. And usually people at that point are pretty quick to, well, they'll do the right thing at that point. But hey, I know I'm between you and lunch. It was an honor to be able to address this group. I love Louisiana. I'm just honored to be back here, and hopefully some of this was value added to you. If you have some questions that you didn't want to ask in the wider group, I'll stick around a little bit and break some bread with you. Thank you very much.